When I was a kid, I read the book Invisible Man by the African-American author Ralph Ellison. I can still remember the opening lines. I'm an invisible man. I'm invisible, you see, simply because people refuse to see me. He was talking about the black experience in the United States. But as a Japanese immigrant kid growing up in San Francisco, I totally identified with this invisibility. In the novel, the protagonist is living underground, in isolation, totally unseen. I also thought I lived underground, unseen, isolated. But I came to realize that to some extent, this is true for everyone. And that's what I like to talk about today. So we all live invisible lives. This is something I'm reminded of every day in my life, in my work as a psychotherapist. Sometimes I see my work as the work of making the invisible visible, using words, body language, sometimes pictures. What do I mean by invisible? I mean how we feel when we wake up in the morning. Do we look forward to the day? Do we dread the day, the work day, the school day? I'm talking about how a student might feel after an especially intense, dramatic day at school. And I realize that describes a whole lot of people. I used to work with kids a lot, and one thing I did discover was that kids, pretty much all kids, have these very intense, dramatic, invisible lives. Take the case of a 7th grade boy. He's got a day where he's devastated by the experience of getting one bad glance from the girl that he likes. The same kid goes home, his mother asks him, well, how was your school day? He just shrugs and says, okay. Okay is a very common cover for invisibility. So most of what makes us up as individual human beings is all invisible. Culture. You can't really just tell just by looking at someone what their culture or cultures are, just by looking at them. Remember, one person may grow up in different cultures. How motivated they might be, you can't tell just by looking at them. How much effort they're putting in, can't tell that either. Languages. What languages do they speak? Can't tell that just by looking at them until they start speaking. But even that language is a little tricky. And that's because on the outside, we can't see the invisible thoughts and feelings that a speaker might have and that he or she is trying to say. So we can't really compare the two. There's only one person who can do that, and that's the speaker, him or herself. There might be a gap. They know more than anyone else. So what's the big deal? People lead invisible lives. Who cares? Well, it turns out that it's a universal need for people to have their feelings reflected back by people around them. In developmental psychology, there's a concept called mirroring. This is the idea that in order for babies to grow psychologically, emotionally, they need their caregivers around them to reflect back what they might be feeling. So let's say a baby has a really great day. Clean, fresh diapers, especially tasty milk. They're going to be happy and smiling. It's important for the mothers or the caregivers to reflect that back with a similar kind of facial expression. But let's say the baby's having a really bad day. Diapers are dirty, hasn't been changed. Bad milk day, let's say. And then he's going to be frowning maybe, and it's important for the baby, for the caregivers around them to reflect that back. And in this way, the baby develops a sense of self, a sense of identity, that their feelings are valid. If they don't get this in a consistent way, then this can lead to problems later on in life. But it turns out that's not just babies who need this kind of mirroring. This need for validation, for reflection from others, it continues throughout life. The only thing is, as we get older, our inner lives become much more complex. This is the secret to the power of social media. Our brains are hardwired to respond to likes on, say, Facebook. So even though people tell us to not care about what other people think, we might tell us to not care about what other people think, we can't help it. It's in our genes. So if it's so important for our development, how come there's not more seeing it going on? Well, one obvious reason is that they're invisible. Our thoughts, our feelings, our intentions, how we feel. Well, I think there's another thing that gets in the way. And I think it's because the flip side of our need as individuals to feel seen inside of us is that we don't like this invisibility in other people. So what we tend to do is we lump people into these categories based on what they look like or maybe some external fact about them. For example, he's from so-and-so country, so he's always going to be on time. It might be partially true now. Or her parents are rich, sends her to all these private schools, she has no worries. So we love to put labels on people. And we love gossip. And then we're all surprised when we hear the tragic news of some celebrity who committed suicide. Just like us, celebrities also have inner invisible lives, even though their outer lives might be on front page news. So why do I care about this topic? One reason is very personal. I spent my youth basically underground, isolated, unseen, and I didn't know how to see other people, I didn't know how to make myself feel seen. This went on for a long time and developed into a very serious mental illness. Fortunately, I was able to recover through the help of psychotherapy later in life, and even though I can never get those lost years back, I think it helped me become a therapist later on in life. I have another reason. It has to do with what I've observed in society. According to at least one study, empathy has been on the decline the past few decades. And it's especially, we see the steepest declines with the rise of social media and the rise of the smartphone. And it's especially, we see the steepest declines with the rise of social media and the rise of the smartphone. Why will this be? One way to look at it is that with social media, with its emphasis on visual imagery, has encouraged us to forget that people actually live invisible lives. So we tend to see Instagram images and we're inclined to believe them as reliable indicators of other people's inner lives. We don't like that invisibility. So when I think about today's theme of walking towards tomorrow, my mind doesn't go to more technology, even though I'm sure we're going to have amazing technology in the future. Instead, I ask myself, how do we as humans fit in? A few years ago, the tech entrepreneur Jack Ma was asked, how did he think the future of education should look like? He thought about it and said, there's no way we humans could ever compete with machines, at least in data analytic type areas. There's no way. So instead, he emphasized the arts, the humanities, emotional intelligence, all that makes us human. So one thing I know about machines, as amazing as they are, is that they can never appreciate a jazz concert, they have no inner lives, and they cannot see my inner life. So what can we do? So when I'm sitting with a client, one common image I have, a visual image, is that of an underwater terrain. There might be valleys of depression, valleys of grief, mountain peaks of excitement or happiness, ridges of anxiety. And just like the physical objects, these internal psychological objects are just as real. They're just as real. Unlike the physical objects, though, I can't just quickly see how deep a valley might be or how high a peak might be. So then I have to have some tools to help me navigate underwater those unseen areas. I have two very simple tools, curiosity and questions. Note that there's nothing out there about no psychobabble, nothing about the intersubjective space between transference and countertransference. I won't explain that here. And nothing out there about assumptions or judgment. Those two things really get in the way of me trying to navigate the inner invisible world of people. Notice also how questions naturally follow being curious. If I think I know the other person's invisible intentions, I'm not going to bother to ask any questions. When I think that someone's being rude to me, I always have to remind myself, people lead invisible lives. I don't know if they got a phone call that morning from the hospital telling them that the loved one is in the ICU. I don't know if they had a terrible fight that morning with their parents or their spouse. I can't see any of this. And if I can't see it, I have no basis to be offended. Another way these two tools show up is how I listen to people. Whenever people talk about their inner lives, about how they might feel, I always believe them. If someone tells me that after 2 months after winning the lottery, they're really miserable, very anxious, I 100% believe them. I don't just believe them, I may inquire further and ask more questions. If somebody who's studying English as a second language comes to me and says, in apparently pretty good English, that their English is not so good, I'm going to believe them, my first step. After that, I might ask further questions like, in what situations is speaking English the most challenging? In this way, the other person feels more seen and understood by me. I'm not imposing what I think they should feel or think. There's a great benefit. When the other person feels more seen, more understood by me, they're in a much better position to understand me. So the more time we spend in invisibility, the harder it becomes to get out of that to become visible. And with time, it can also lead to a lot of groupthink because we make a lot of assumptions about other people. So to get back to that novel, Invisible Man, it turns out that the protagonist living underground in isolation was totally temporary. It was just like a hibernation. At the end of the book, the protagonist is making plans to leave his underground room and re-enter society and be seen. With these two simple tools of curiosity and questions, we can all do something similar, because invisible lives matter. Thank you.